My name is Delia Marsh, and I was 34 years old the morning my brother-in-law hired a paint crew to erase me from my own land. I watched from the kitchen window while two men in white coveralls stood at the gate at the end of the gravel drive. My husband Marcus had been in the ground for 11 days. The sign that had read Marsh and Callaway Farm, EST 1987, was getting a new coat. By noon it would say Callaway Farm only. When I walked out to the road, Marcus's brother Reid looked at me the way you look at a stray that's wandered onto your property. He said, and I want you to hear these words exactly. Your husband's gone, Delia. That means this isn't yours anymore. It never really was. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I went back inside and made a pot of coffee and thought about a single piece of paper that had been sitting in a filing cabinet in the county recorder's office for 6 years, a piece of paper Reid had never asked to see because he'd never imagined he needed to. He was about to find out what was on it. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people let the paperwork do the shouting. If you're new here, hit subscribe. I put out a new story every week, and the comment section is the best part. Drop a hello so I know you made it. I want to start at the beginning because the ending doesn't make sense unless you understand where I came from and what kind of woman I was when I arrived in the Callaway family. I grew up in a town called Ferris Bend, about 90 miles east of where Marcus and I eventually settled. My father ran a grain co-op. My mother kept the books. From the time I was 11 years old, I understood ledgers, soil classifications, drainage assessments, yield projections. Numbers were a language in our house the same way other families spoke about weather or sports. My father had a saying he repeated so often it became background noise. The land doesn't lie, but the paperwork tells the truth. I didn't fully understand what he meant until I was an adult, but I stored it somewhere, the way you store a tool you don't have a use for yet. I met Marcus Callaway when I was 26, and he was 31. He was at a farm equipment auction in the next county over, standing in the sun looking at a used disc harrow with the focused expression of a man doing mental arithmetic. He wasn't flashy. He wore work boots that had actually worked. He had a way of listening when you talked, not waiting for his turn, actually listening, and I noticed it within the first 10 minutes of conversation. We were married 14 months later. The Callaway family farm was a working operation outside a town called Granger's Mill, in a county where roughly half the economy was still agricultural. The property had been in the family for decades. When Marcus's parents, Harold and Susan Callaway, had started slowing down in their late 60s, Marcus had stepped in gradually, not with fanfare, not with a formal announcement, just with presence. He showed up. He fixed what needed fixing. He called his parents on the same day every week, not because anyone told him to, but because he was that kind of person. Reid, Marcus's younger brother by 4 years, had moved to the city for work in his late 20s and stayed there. He came home for holidays, occasionally for weekends. He had opinions about the farm, strong ones, frequently shared, but he had not put in the hours. That distinction mattered to Marcus's father Harold more than anyone in the family seemed to realize. Harold Callaway was not a demonstrative man. He said what he meant in as few words as possible. He had the farmer's habit of watching people carefully over long periods of time before forming any conclusion, and then holding that conclusion quietly rather than announcing it. Harold and I had gotten along well from the beginning, in the way that two people who communicate primarily through competence tend to get along. He didn't compliment me often. What he did instead was ask my opinion about things. Soil amendments. Lease terms. Whether the eastern field needed to be rested another season or could take a cover crop. When Harold Callaway asked you a practical question, it was a form of respect. I understood that. I answered honestly, without performing expertise I didn't have, and he appreciated the honesty more than the answers. In the second year of our marriage, Harold began quietly reordering some of the property's structure. Marcus mentioned it in passing, that his father was working with an attorney on the estate, getting things organized the way older farmers sometimes do when they start thinking about what comes after. Nobody in the family paid this much attention. Harold was methodical and unhurried, and the assumption on all sides seemed to be that he would divide things sensibly between his two sons when the time came. What nobody except Harold, and eventually me, and eventually one county records office, understood was that the reorganization was not a simple equal division. Harold had been watching both his sons for years. He had done his assessment, and he had made his decision. I didn't know the specifics at the time. What I did know was that one afternoon in what turned out to be the 3rd year of our marriage, Harold drove over to our side of the property. We had a small house about a quarter-mile from the main farmhouse, and sat down at our kitchen table. He set a manila folder on the table and slid it across to me. Marcus was out in the fields. It was just Harold and me. "Read that when I'm gone," he said. Not threatening, not dramatic. The same tone he used to say the frost was coming early, or the water pump needed a look. I said I would. He picked up his coffee cup, drank the last of it, set it down, and stood up. "You're good for this land," he said. Then he walked back out to his truck and drove home. I put the folder in our filing cabinet. I didn't open it. I kept my word. Marcus and I built our life in those years. I ran the books for the farm operation while holding a part-time consulting position with an agricultural co-op 3 towns over. Not because we needed the income, but because I had the skills and they were useful, and sitting still had never agreed with me. Marcus improved the eastern fields substantially through a 3-year rotation plan he developed himself. We talked about expanding. We talked about everything the way people do when they're genuinely in it together. Marcus got sick in his 40th year. Not dramatically, not all at once. A diagnosis in the spring, a harder prognosis by fall. He handled it the same way he handled everything, methodically, without theater. We reorganized what needed reorganizing. We talked to attorneys. We made sure the paperwork was in order, which was a phrase Marcus used with the same seriousness his father had always used it. When Harold died the year before Marcus's diagnosis, Marcus had quietly inherited his portion of the farm structure, and certain other arrangements had quietly transferred as well. I knew what Marcus knew. We were in it together. Marcus died on a Thursday morning in November, in our bedroom, with me beside him. He was 43 years old. Reid arrived from the city that evening. I want to be precise about what happened in the 11 days between Marcus's death and the moment Reid hired the paint crew, because I think precision matters here. Grief has a way of making timelines blurry, and I don't want anything blurry. The first indication came on the 2nd day. Reid was staying in the main farmhouse, his parents' old house, which had been empty since Harold died and was technically part of the estate still in process. He came over to our house the morning after Marcus's funeral, which meant 2 days after the death, and sat in my kitchen with the posture of a man who had already made decisions he hadn't yet announced. He told me he thought it would make sense to consolidate the farm operation. He said it calmly, reasonably, in the tone people use for things they want to sound inevitable. He said that with Marcus gone, there was no one to manage the day-to-day on this side of the property. He said he'd been thinking about relocating, not immediately, but within the year. He said it would be cleaner if things were under one roof, administratively speaking. I listened. I asked what exactly he meant by consolidate. He said he thought the property should be restructured so that the operation was under his name. For simplicity. For efficiency. He used both those words. He said, and this is the part one want you to hold on to. It's a family decision, Delia. Marcus would have wanted things to stay in the family. I said I understood what he was saying. I did not tell him what I knew about the filing cabinet. 3 days after that conversation, his attorney called my phone. A man named Pitts, from a firm in the city. He was polite and technical and spoke about the estate timeline and the need to clarify title on several parcels before probate closed. He mentioned Parcel 7C specifically, not by name but by description, the northeast corner parcel, the one with the road frontage. He said there might be some documentation to reconcile on that one. He said it with the careful neutrality of a man who suspected he already knew the answer, but was hoping I didn't. I said I'd look into it. I did not tell him about the folder. The week of the funeral, Marcus's extended family came through. His cousin Wren, who I had always liked. His Aunt Patricia, who I had mixed feelings about. Various peripheral people who had opinions they were only partially successful at suppressing. There was a dinner at the farmhouse the night before the burial, and Reid stood at the head of the table the way a person stands at the head of a table when they're practicing for something. He gave a toast to Marcus. It was genuinely good. He loved his brother, I do believe that, and it showed. But even in grief, something in Reid moved toward ownership. When people asked about the farm's future, he answered, When someone asked me directly, he redirected. It was subtle. Most people in the room probably didn't notice. I noticed. After the dinner, his Aunt Patricia found me in the kitchen and stood close in the way people do when they want to say something they've decided to dress as comfort. She said Marcus had always worried about how I'd manage on my own. She said it might be a relief, honestly, to let the family take the lead for a while. She said, "You can focus on healing Delia. Reid knows what he's doing with land." I thanked her for her concern. My jaw ached for an hour afterward. The day before the paint crew arrived, Reid knocked on my door in the early evening. He had a set of papers with him, not legal documents, but a handwritten summary of what he was proposing. He walked me through it at the kitchen table. It was, in a surface way, not entirely unreasonable. He was proposing to take over the farm operation, maintain the property, and pay me a monthly amount he described as fair market rent for continued use of my house. He had a number written down, $1,400 a month. I looked at the number for a moment. Our house sat on a parcel appraised at over $300,000 in the most recent county assessment. The surrounding fields that Reid was proposing to fold into his consolidated operation generated, in an average year, somewhere between $80,000 and $110,000 in revenue. The $1,400 was not an oversight. It was a message. He watched me read. Then he said in the same reasonable, family logic voice, "I know this is hard to think about right now. But Marcus is gone, and you don't have kids, and you've never actually run an operation of this size on your own. I'm trying to make this easy for you." I said I needed to think about it. He said he understood completely. He said we had a little time before probate required decisions. He left. The next morning, the paint crew arrived at the gate. I watched from the kitchen window. The two men in white coveralls worked efficiently. They had the name painted over by mid-morning. By noon, the gate read Callaway Farm. One name, no ampersand. Nothing to suggest that a woman named Delia had ever watered that land or walked those fields or stayed up calculating whether the eastern fence line needed to move to improve drainage in a wet spring. Reid stood by the gate while they worked. He had his phone out for some of it, not watching them. When the work was done, he looked up at the sign and nodded the way people nod at something that has come out right. Then he looked toward the house, toward the kitchen window, and I looked back at him. He gave a small, not unkind wave. The kind of wave that says, "This is just how things are now." I raised my coffee cup. Something had gone very still in my chest. Not cold, not hot. Still. The way a field goes still before a storm that hasn't gathered yet. Probate timelines move at their own pace, and I was not in a hurry. I called an attorney in the county seat, not Reid's attorney, not anyone connected to the Callaway family's existing counsel, but a woman named Ogilvy who had been recommended to me years earlier by Harold Callaway himself, in one of his characteristically brief and pointed ways. He had said, "If you ever need someone who reads land records for a living, call Ogilvy." At the time I had filed it away the same way I'd filed away his other compressed pieces of advice. I found her card in the folder he had left me, clipped to the inside cover. I called her the morning after Reid's crew repainted the gate. She had already done her own research by the time we met. She spread her notes on the conference table, looked at me over her reading glasses, and said, "How much of this did you already know?" I said some of it. She said, "Do you understand what this means for the probate?" I said I had a general sense. She said, "Then let's talk about the hearing." The county probate process, for an estate of this complexity, multiple parcels, overlapping deeds, two potential heirs, required what amounts to a formal asset review. This isn't a courtroom drama. It's a meeting mostly. The executor presents documentation. The county assessor is sometimes present when there are title questions. Attorneys for interested parties attend. It is, on the surface, deeply unremarkable. A conference room, folding chairs, fluorescent light, stacks of paper. Reid had engaged an estate attorney, the same Pitts from the phone call, and had been operating with what I can only describe as the unhurried confidence of a man who has never once been surprised by paperwork. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the county administrative offices. The room held a conference table with 8 chairs. Present, the probate referee, a woman named Farron, the county assessor, a man named Douglas Holt, who had held that office for 11 years and had the organized, patient manner of someone who genuinely loved land records, Reid, his attorney Pitts, my attorney Ogilvy, and me. Also present, at Ogilvy's request, was a title officer from the county recorder's office, a quiet woman named Iris Chun who had brought a document case and set it flat on the table without opening it when she sat down. Reid arrived looking prepared. He had a folder. He was wearing a jacket. He shook hands with the assessor and the probate referee in the easy way of a man who has been the most important person in most rooms he enters. He did not shake hands with me. He gave me a nod, the same kind of small, not unkind nod as the wave at the gate, and sat down across the table. His attorney Pitts arranged papers. My attorney Ogilvy arranged papers. The probate referee cleared her throat and went through the standard opening, the scope of the review, the parcels under consideration, the general framework of the proceeding. Pitts presented the estate structure as Reid understood it first. It was orderly and well prepared. He walked through the parcels, the main farmhouse property, the east fields, the equipment outbuildings, the livestock operation. He presented Harold's original will and Marcus's corresponding interest. He spoke about Parcel 7C as one of several parcels to be consolidated under the Callaway estate for probate purposes, describing it as the northeast corner parcel with road frontage, approximately 42 acres. He said nothing unusual. He spoke with the calm of a man who believes the documents will confirm what he is saying. When Pitts finished, probate referee Farron turned to my attorney. Ogilvy said, "We'd like to defer to the county assessor and the title officer on Parcel 7C specifically, if you don't mind starting there." Farron nodded. She looked at Douglas Holt. Holt reached into his document case and withdrew a rolled plat map, the large format county survey kind, the kind that requires both hands to unroll and a flat surface to hold flat. He unrolled it on the conference table, smoothing it with practiced hands, and placed a small weighted edge at each corner. The map showed the full property grid for that section of the county. The Callaway parcels were outlined. Parcel 7C was in the northeast corner, exactly as Pitts had described, 42 acres with road frontage, the most commercially accessible part of the farm. Holt looked at the map for a moment. Then he put on his reading glasses and looked at a separate document in his hand, the recorded chain of title. He said, "The recorded owner of Parcel 7C is..." He paused. Not for drama. I don't think Douglas Holt had a dramatic bone in him. He paused the way you pause when you want to make certain you're reading correctly before you read aloud. Reid shifted in his seat. Holt read my name. Delia Marsh.
Sole Grante.
Deed of transfer recorded 6 years ago. Harold Callaway as grantor. He set the document down and looked up. The room held for a second. Reid looked at Pitts. Pitts looked at the plat map. Something moved across Reid's face. Not anger, not yet. More like a man who has just stepped onto ice and felt it flex. His hand, which had been resting open on the table, closed slowly. Iris Chun, the title officer, unclipped her document case and removed a certified copy of the deed. She set it on the table face up, oriented toward the probate referee. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. The document said what it said. My throat was steady. My hands were in my lap, quiet. Something in my chest had the same stillness it had held the morning I watched them paint over my name, but it was a different kind of still now. The kind that comes after, not before. Ogilvy spoke next, and she spoke with the careful measured pace of someone who has laid a foundation and is now walking across it. She said, "The deed in question was recorded 6 years ago, with the county. Parcel 7C, 42 acres, northeast corner, road frontage, was transferred by Harold Callaway to Delia Marsh as sole grantee. The transfer is unambiguous and was properly recorded. It is not part of the Callaway estate for probate purposes because it ceased to be part of Harold Callaway's property 6 years ago. It is Mrs. Marsh's separate property, held in her name alone." Pitts said, "We weren't made aware of this transfer." Ogilvy said, "The county recorder's records are public." Pitts looked at his papers. The particular quality of his silence was the silence of a lawyer recalculating in real time, not panicked, but very much occupied with something other than the room. Reid said, and I want to give him credit for the evenness of his voice, When did Marcus know about this? Ogilvy looked at me. I said, Marcus knew. Reid's jaw worked once. He looked at the Plat map still flat on the table, at the clean lines of Parcel 7C in the northeast corner, at the recorded chain of title that Holt had set beside it. He looked at Iris Chen's certified copy of the deed with my name on it. He looked at all of it for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, Dad never told me. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact, stated plainly, the way a person states a fact when they are standing inside its consequences. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that the documents hadn't already said better. Probate referee Farron made a notation. She asked Holt to confirm the assessed value of Parcel 7C for the record. Holt consulted his sheet. He said, current assessed value, $380,000. Given the road frontage and the acreage, market value would likely run higher. We see comparable parcels in that corridor selling in the 420 to 460 range. He said it the way he said everything, evenly, factually, as a man reading the honest truth off a piece of paper. $460,000. In the quiet room, with the fluorescent light and the folding chairs and the Plat map weighted at four corners, that number landed with the weight of 6 years of silence. Pitts gathered his papers with careful, deliberate hands. Reid was looking at the table. Not at me, not at the window. At the surface of the table, like a man reading something that isn't there. Farron said the parcel would be formally excluded from the estate inventory and that the remainder of the review could proceed. She said it with the brisk efficiency of a probate referee for whom this was not the strangest thing she'd seen in that room, though possibly in the top 5. Ogilvy thanked her. I thanked her. Iris Chen collected her document case, nodded once in my direction, not warmly, not coldly, just the acknowledgement of one professional to another, and that was the end of it. The meeting broke up with the particular awkward efficiency of things that I've concluded before anyone was ready for them to. In the hallway outside the conference room, Reid caught up with me before I reached the elevator. He didn't touch my arm. He stood slightly to my left and said in a lowered voice, I want to talk about this. I said, I was sure he did. He said, I didn't know about the deed, Delia. I want you to understand that. I wasn't trying to take something that was yours. I thought I knew what the situation was. There was something almost believable about it, and I want to be fair to that. Reid had operated on an assumption. The assumption had been wrong. People do that. But he had also stood at a gate and watched a paint crew erase my name from land that was legally mine, and he had slid a document across my kitchen table proposing $1,400 a month for use of my own property, and he had done those things with the unhurried confidence of a man who had already decided how the story ended. The assumption might have been honest. The confidence was not. I said, call Ogilvy's office. He said, I'm asking you, person to person. I said, call Ogilvy's office, Reid. He stood there for a moment longer. His attorney Pitts came out of the conference room, looked at the two of us, and touched Reid's elbow. Reid went. I took the elevator down and walked out into the parking lot, and it was a clear, cold morning, the kind of November morning that smells of soil and frost, and I stood next to my truck for a minute before I got in. Then I drove to the hardware store and bought a new sign for the farm gate. In the weeks that followed, the reality of the parcel's ownership settled into the surrounding situation, like water finding its level. The main Callaway estate, the farmhouse, the east fields, the equipment, went through probate on the standard timeline. Reid was the primary heir for those parcels, which was as Marcus had understood it would be. I had never had any claim to the main farmhouse or the primary operational fields. I had not expected to. That was not the point. The point was Parcel 7C, 42 acres of prime northeast corner land with road frontage, assessed at nearly $400,000, deeded in my name alone 6 years ago by Harold Callaway, who had watched both his sons and made his assessment and communicated it the way he communicated everything, through paperwork, without ceremony, in advance. The road frontage mattered because it meant the parcel had independent access. It could be farmed separately. It could be leased. It could be sold if I chose. It was mine to do with, as I decided. I hadn't decided anything yet. What I had decided was that the $1,400 proposal was no longer a conversation I was having. Pitts sent a letter to Ogilvy's office approximately 3 weeks after the probate hearing. The letter was professional and measured and proposed a negotiated access agreement, an arrangement by which Reid, as the operator of the adjacent parcels, would pay a fair market lease rate for annual use of Parcel 7C's acreage and road access during the farming season. Ogilvy forwarded it to me with a one-line note. They'd like to negotiate. Your call. The lease rate Pitts proposed in that letter was 4 times what Reid had written on the paper he'd slid across my kitchen table 6 weeks earlier. I read it twice. I set it down. My throat was clear. My hands were still. I called Ogilvy and told her we could have a conversation. Marcus's cousin Wren called me around that same time. She had heard through the family, the way things always travel through families, imperfectly and selectively, that the probate hearing had not gone the way Reid had expected. She asked me what happened, and I told her the short version. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Harold always liked you." I said I knew. She said, "Did you know he was going to do it?" I said, "He told me to read the folder when he was gone." Another pause. Then she said, "He didn't tell Reid anything?" I said, "Harold didn't explain his decisions. He made them." She said she understood. Marcus's Aunt Patricia, who had told me in the kitchen that Reid knew what he was doing with land, did not call. I did not expect her to. Reid and I did eventually negotiate a lease. The terms were fair, not punitive, not generous fair. Ogilvy reviewed everything. The acreage was leased for operational use by the Callaway farm operation at a rate reflecting current county comparable figures. The lease included a clause about maintenance of the road access and a separate clause about the gate. The gate clause was my addition. Ogilvy had raised an eyebrow. I said, "Leave it in." It said that any signage on or adjacent to the access road fronting Parcel 7C would reflect the recorded ownership, which meant it would have my name on it. Reid's attorney flagged it. Reid, apparently, did not fight it. The new sign went up on a Wednesday morning. I put it up myself. It was a simple thing, painted wood, black letters on white, and it said what it needed to say. I stood at the gate for a minute after I hung it, the way Harold used to stand looking at something he'd finished. The fields were brown-gray with late November. The road was empty. The morning was cold and quiet. Then I went inside and made coffee. Harold Callaway didn't leave me Parcel 7C because I was his daughter-in-law, or because he felt sorry for me, or because he had a dramatic plan to settle scores. He left it to me because he had watched me work for years with the same careful patience he applied to everything, and he had reached a conclusion, and he had acted on it in the most permanent way he knew how. He had it recorded. He didn't tell me the specifics in advance because, I think, he didn't want the gift to carry the weight of obligation. He wanted me to work the land because I loved it, not because I knew what was coming. And he didn't tell Reid because Reid's portion of his conclusions was its own separate matter. There's something I have thought about often since that November morning in the conference room. The people who are most certain they know the shape of a situation are frequently the ones who have never looked at the documents. Confidence isn't knowledge. Assumption isn't title. And the paperwork, the quiet, unhurried, legally recorded paperwork, will still be there when the confidence runs out. That's what Harold understood. That's what he was trying to teach me, in his few-worded way, before he was gone. I think I finally understood it the morning they painted over my name, and I didn't say a word. That's my story. A Plat map, a manila folder, and 42 acres of roadfront land in the northeast corner of a county that keeps very good records. I want to ask you something before I go, and I'd genuinely like to know your answer. Harold Callaway made a decision, a significant, legally binding decision about his property and his family, and he kept it almost entirely to himself until after his death. He left me a folder and told me to read it when he was gone. He never explained it to Reid. He never called a family meeting. He just acted quietly and let the paperwork speak. Some people would say that was the right thing to do, that a person has the right to decide what happens to their own land, full stop, without justification. Others might say that a little more transparency earlier could have prevented all of it. What do you think? If you were in Harold's position, watching one child do the work and another show up for the credit, how would you have handled it? Would you have said something, Or would you have let the deed do the talking? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.